Good morning and welcome to First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. My name is Jay Tiefenbrunn and I'm very pleased to be your Director of Music Ministries. I'd like to invite you to join in the singing this morning with hymn number 346 in the gray hymnal. Hymn number 346, Come Sing a Song With Me. Please rise in body or in spirit as you're so moved and join in the singing. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll give you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll sing a song of love and a rose in the winter. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Our second song this morning is in the turquoise hymnal. It's number 1030, Sia Hamba, number 1030. We'll sing it in Zulu, then English, and back to Zulu. This is where my shaking crew gets to get their shake on. Sia Hamben kukanyen kwenkos, Sia Hamben kukanyen kwenkos, Sia Hamben kukanyen kwenkos, Sia Hamben kukanyen kwenkos, Sia Hamba, Hamba, Sia Hamba, Sia Hamba kukanyen kwenkos, Sia Hamba, Hamba, Sia Hamba, Sia Hamben kukanyen kwenkos. We are marching in the light of God. 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 We are marching, marching, we are marching, oh, we are marching in the light of God. We are marching, marching, we are marching, oh, we are marching in the light of God. Sia hamba, sia ha, ben kukanyen kwenkos, sia ben kukanyen kwenkos, sia ben kukanyen kwenkos, sia ben kukanyen kwenkos, sia hamba, hamba, sia hamba, sia ben kukanyen kwenkos, sia hamba, hamba, sia hamba, sia ben kukanyen kwenkos. Good morning. Please take a moment and greet your neighbors.
for the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurture and compassion, we give thanks. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. May our many sparks meet and merge in communion of heart and soul.
We have gathered from across Nashville, leaving our homes and our separate lives to tell a story together, to search for our shared vision in a messy world. Let us open our minds and our hearts and see how our story begins.
Anansi was the trickster spider god of Africa. He was the prince of stories. Well, not always. Once upon a time, there was a time when we didn't have stories. There was only one person in the world who had stories, and that was the sky god, Naime. Anansi decided one day that he would get those stories for us. So he spun a web up into the sky, caught a rainbow, and asked the sky god, "Hey, sky god, how much for that box of stories?" "Ho ho, little man, you couldn't afford it." "Yeah? Try me." So he began to list the things that he wanted. First, Onini, the python snake that would squeeze the life out of any one person. Osebo, the leopard whose teeth were as sharp as spears. The hornets of Momboro, whose sting would poison anyone they touched. And Moatia, the fairy who had never been seen. Anansi wrote the list down, and he got to work. First day, he went into the deep, dark forest. And he was dragging a stick. Just by talking to him, can you imagine that he brought Onini down out of the branches, talked to him into rounding himself around the stick, and then tied him up? Go figure, the man could talk his way out of anything. The next day, he went into the even deeper, darker part of the forest. There, he dug a huge pit, a big old hole, and then he covered it with branches and leaves until you had no idea there was even a pit there. The next morning, he came back to find Osebo the leopard trapped inside the hole. On the third day, he went even to the deepest and darkest part of the forest. Can you even imagine being confronted by a huge hornet's nest of really vicious hornets? Yeah. Anansi talked them into flying into his calabash because it was going to rain and their house was going to be destroyed. Not true. He popped the lid on the calabash and he trapped the hornets. Now, how do you get a fairy that has never been seen by anyone? This was going to take a little bit of thought. He pulled out his old work gloves. Let's just be honest, he hadn't used them in a really long time.
But he went and he started gathering sap from the trees, especially the odam tree. It was so sticky and dark it reminded him of tar. But he began to sculpt it into that little head and a body and feet, arms. It was a little doll. And then he attached a web to the back of the doll, so now he had a puppet. He put the doll in front of the odam tree, and in front of the doll, he put a big bowl of candy. That night, when twilight came, all the fairies came out to play, including Moatia. She came and she took circles around and around the doll and around that big candy bowl. She stood in front of the doll, curtsied very low, and said, "Excuse me, may I have a piece of candy?" The doll nodded yes. And so she dug in the bowl until she found the biggest piece of candy, and then she ate it all up. Then she curtsied again and said, "Excuse me, may I have another piece of candy?" The doll again nodded yes. And she dug through the bowl until she found the next biggest piece of candy, and she stuffed it in her face. This went on and on with the questioning and the digging until there was no candy left in the bowl. She may have been greedy, but she was a very polite fairy. She curtsied low again and said, "Thank you very much for the candy." The doll just sat there. It didn't nod. It didn't shake its head. It didn't do anything. Well, Moatia was a polite fairy, and you had certain rules that you followed, and this doll was not following the rules. She lost her temper. When someone says, "Thank you," you are supposed to say you're welcome. And she hit the doll with both hands and promptly stuck in the sticky, sticky sap. No. If you didn't want me to take the candy, you should have said no. And then she kicked the doll with both feet and promptly stuck in the sap. Anansi came out from behind the tree where he was hiding and carefully picked up the doll and the fairy, spun a web up into the sky, swung around a rainbow, and landed in the kingdom of Naime. The sky god couldn't deny that he had done a good job. He had all four of the things that was demanded. So he gave him the big box of stories. He brought it home, shared it with his wife Aso, and together they opened that box. Every story flew out. Stories, yarns, tales, like, "Hey, what'd you do last night?" kind of things. Every single story in the world flew out. They were free. And now it is up to us to keep them free. Every single day, tell your story and keep it free. I'll listen.
We'll now sing our children to their summer activities out the side door in the back with Jonah, with the song on the inside back cover of the gray hymnal. May your mind be open to new learning. May your lips bring truth into the world. May your heart know love and your hands do the work of justice as you go your way in peace. As you go your way in peace.
Good morning. My name is David Brandon. I'm a member of this congregation, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here in the sanctuary, and to those joining us online to worship this morning. In order to reach a wider community than those able to be physically present on Sunday morning, portions of the service are live streamed and available on YouTube and on our website at thefun.org. Before I continue, let me remind you to please silence your cell phones. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation we have made a covenant together. We affirm our independence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We deepen our relationships as we create a compassionate, welcoming community, nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. We ask you to wear the paper name tags because it helps us to get to know you better. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you may find it here. Whether you are new to Unitarian Universalism or visiting for another UU congregation, we invite you to stop by the welcome table after the service to have questions answered. People become members of this congregation by signing the membership book and supporting the church with their time and finances. If you are considering joining the church, please talk to our assistant minister, Holly Miller. Following the service, we hope everyone will enjoy coffee and fellowship in the social area, where you will also find information about current opportunities for engagement and reflection. There are a number of announcements in the weekly bulletin, which I hope you will take home and read. Thank you.
We have each come here today from our own daily lives, with joys and concerns that we carry inside of us and into this place. Some of those we may wish to keep within, and some of those we may wish to share with this community so that we may help one another carry those joys and concerns. This time you may come forward, and our lay minister, Hal Potts, can help you release a stone into the bowl of water to release what you are carrying. If you'd like to share with us, you may write out your joy or concern on the yellow slips of paper that you'll find in your pews and bring them forward to me to be read. May this be a time when you are present with all of yourself. Into the spirit of prayer, let us hold these joys and concerns in our hearts and our minds. Spirit of wisdom, help us to make sense of our lives, to weave together our victories and our heartaches into one story. Grant us the bravery of knowing that we are the heroes and the heroines of our own stories, and the empathy of knowing that other people are the heroines of theirs. Help us to support one another through our journeys, long and short, joyous and devastated, and to remember what it is we are journeying for. May it be so. The hope of this church is to share a journey of spiritual growth and to live out our faith in this world. We will now take an offering that allows us to enact that faith and growth. We are currently sharing our plate with Safe Haven, the only shelter in the community that takes in entire families experiencing homelessness, and half of the cash collected today will go to fund their work in our community. The gifts of this congregation will now be most gratefully received.
We are all storytellers. I have people come up to me and ask me, have you gone to school for this? Teach me. And it's utterly ridiculous because you are all storytellers. Every time you come home from work and you share stories at the dinner table, there you are. Every time you grieve with a friend, you share stories. Every time you make up stupid jokes with your kids, you share stories. But why do our brains work this way? Why are we storytelling animals? Well, one of the more famous people to study this phenomenon was Carl Jung. As a student of Sigmund Freud, he put all of his teacher's lessons in nice layers and started adding to it. And we now have these ideas of dream symbology and the archetypes and the collective unconscious. That is a great big melting pot, if you don't know, that all of us share, all of these ideas and needs that we have as humans, the need to be loved, the need to belong, to find out who we are and express ourselves, that's in there. In the 1930s, Joseph Campbell came along and took some of Carl Jung's ideas and then started adding archaeology and history and literature into the mix. One of his theories was that two tribes who would never have any interaction with one another, whether they be trade or wars or whatever, could come up with the same collection of stories with only minor details differing. Let's look at Cinderella. Most of us know actually the French version that was written down by Charles Perrault. But in Germany, her name is Aschenputtel. And in Asia, our glass slippers are fur boots. And in Mexico, she is a he and has a magical talking horse, not a fairy godmother. But it's all the same story. And it changes as we need it to change because of who we are. Look at Anansi. Anansi, trickster spider god of Africa, was brought onto the slave ships with the black people. He came with them. But when they stopped off in the Caribbean islands, he had to change because they needed him to. He changed to a little old woman who would sit next to the fire and share the histories with the children so they would never forget. Her name is Aunt Nancy. And she changed again when she was brought to the American South. She changed her name, she changed her face, and she slid her way right into that collection of Uncle Remus stories, which are actually a nice collection of African folk tales. Like our modern pantheons, our heroes and our villains and our tricksters all change as we need them to. Last fall, the Association of American Colleges and Universities published an article that focused on transformations in healing, racial healing circles. And in it was written, people are defined over time by the unique stories told about them by family, friends, teachers, and even those they barely know or may view through a derogatory demographic lens. just as important are the stories we tell about ourselves, manifesting our own self-worth as we attempt to carve out our place in society. We are all storytellers. Our stories are powerful. They have these deep roots back to cave walls and firesides and the first guttural attempts at language. They evolve as we do. Our stories are our lives manifested. Our stories are power. Our stories are change. Why don't you tell your story? You'll find we have a lot more in common than you think.
This is a reading by Oriah Mountain Dreamer. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me which planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you've touched the center of your own sorrow, if you've been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own. If you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning yourself to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself, if you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul, if you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it's not pretty, every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of the lake and shout to the silver moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments.
Good morning. In the fall of 2001, I was not in a good place. I was 23, and I thought off to a terrible start as an adult. I was out of work, a victim of the collapsing dot-com bubble. My roommate and I were barely speaking. We'd been very close friends once, but it had a falling out, which was mostly my fault. I needed a new place to live and a new job, and I feared I would find neither. This was the beginning of the darkest period of my life. I didn't know what to do, and even if I had been able to conjure a plan, I had no confidence in my ability to enact it. I felt hopeless, desperate. I wanted to escape. So I turned to an old friend, television. This is the story of how television saved my life. It began, honestly, I don't know when it began precisely. So let's say it was on an October afternoon in a small, messy bedroom in an apartment by the river on the edge of downtown Nashville. I had a 13-inch television, but no cable TV. Oh, I could have had cable, but instead I had pride. For you see, the cable was in my roommate's name. Still, somehow on that October afternoon, I managed to tune in to a local WB affiliate via a rigged and tenuous antenna. The picture was mostly recognizable, and the sound came through just fine. It was an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it was just beginning. In this episode, Buffy Summers, the teenage vampire slayer, had come home to find her mother lying awkwardly and stiffly along the sofa. Buffy rushed to her side, calling to her mother, shaking her, trying to bring her around. As you can imagine, a television show about vampire slaying had its share of death. But it was never anything like this. There was no music, only the sounds of Buffy stumbling towards the phone, and then of the barely stifled panic in her voice as she spoke with the 911 operator. There were no cuts to remind the viewer that this was a fiction, only one steady, unrelenting shot of a very real scene. There, on the edge of my single bed before that small, snowy screen, I was suddenly 9 years old again, sitting beside my younger brother as our father told us that our mother was gone. And in that way pure emotion has of forgetting its cause, the lingering grief of loss combined with the fear and depression of my current situation. This fictional story had triggered within me a flood of real feeling. Even now, I lack the emotional intelligence to describe it. The word catharsis seems hardly big enough. I cried a lot. That experience was powerful, but it was only the beginning. I know now that what I felt went well beyond grief and fear for the future. I was, in fact, in a deep depression. I should have sought professional help, but instead I reached out to more familiar things. While some of what I tried is a topic for another day, the stories I found on my television played a vital role in my healing. I've already mentioned Buffy, but in addition to helping me cope with loss, it helped me see that mistakes can be overcome and that even weirdos can be cool. Then there's Angel, a Buffy spinoff, a show about a vampire with a soul who discovers that doing the right thing matters, even if there's no reward waiting in the end. To this boy raised in a conservative Church of Christ, that was a hard lesson to internalize. There was Scrubs, on the surface a wacky sitcom, but underneath the exploration of the importance of living an authentic, full life as part of a loving community. Joan of Arcadia was about a high school girl who had a rather personal relationship with God and who struggled to come to terms with tragedy, loss, and the sheer unfairness of the world. The Gilmore Girls was about courage, about boldly claiming life, and about facing hardship with humor, confidence, and plenty of coffee. Now, I'm not advocating for the better mental health through 5 years of watching television approach to healing. There are better ways. I'm just telling my story. These stories, their characters and settings, for me, they were a connection. In a way, they were a connection to humanity and to the world, but more importantly, they gave me a way to connect to myself. I lived vicariously through the hardships, struggles, and victories that played out before me. In them, I saw both who I was and who I could become. Through them, I was able to feel and to process that which I was too afraid to face alone. Somewhere along the way, I found a new apartment, I got a job, I reestablished a friendship with my former roommate. I found the desire to give church another try and started coming here. I allowed myself to be open to a connection with Mary and found the courage to pursue what is the most important relationship in my life. Today, life is good. I won't claim the darkness is completely gone, but it no longer controls me. I don't watch as much TV as I used to. I don't need it like I once did. But I'm very grateful that when I needed a safe way to connect, I was able to find one. I'm thankful to the writers, directors, actors, and all those involved in telling the stories that helped me heal. Thank you.
Let's sing together. Number 1007 in the turquoise hymnal, There's a River Flowing in My Soul. If you'd rather not use the book, I'll call out the words before each verse, and we can sing from the pews. Flowing in my soul.
There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul, flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart, in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my mind, flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul.
I invite you to take a deep breath, to feel your weight settle, your shoulders relax. I invite you to let your gaze fall softly or close your eyes and open your hands so that they may receive. As we move into a time of meditative silence, I invite you to think about the stories that you are weaving in your own lives. May it be so.
Good morning. Who here is familiar with the Sesame Street story, The Monster at the End of this book? Awesome. Okay, at least a few of you. That's good. For those who aren't, it is a postmodern children's literature classic. Lovable Furiel Grover from Sesame Street, the blue one with the pink nose, spends the whole book trying to get the child reader not to turn the page because he's read the title and there's a monster at the end. He builds all of these illustrated walls of wood and brick, and of course, every time the child turns the page, these constructions just like completely crumble. It's adorable. It teaches kids how to turn pages, like how books work, and it's just really cute and funny. And it turns out that at the end, it was Grover all along. He's the monster, and it's cute. So in the book of my life, there was a monster also. Like in many fairy tales, she was a wicked woman in a position of power, my mom. I don't know if it's because we were too similar or too different, but we just never got along. And that animosity kind of turned into abuse as I entered adolescence. It's really difficult to grow up in a world where like the one person that's supposed to always have your back, who created you, turns out to be your villain, right? In college, I studied art and literature, but my favorite is the combination of art and literature, comics and children's books and illustrated texts. I particularly love graphic memoirs like Mouse and Fun Home and Persepolis. These author-artists curated their memories. They construct a scene. They draw what's happened to them. And this shows a lot more emotion and a lot more, like they have to really choose the poses and the positions, the expressions of anger and sadness on their characters' faces. A lot of times that's their own family. By the time I began work on my master's thesis art project, I hadn't had contact with my mom for several years, and I decided I was going to give my own comic a try, and what better subject matter than your childhood wounds? I based my comic on the monster at the end of this book, and like Grover, at the beginning, I try to dissuade the reader from reading the story. Listen, you don't want to hear about my mommy issues. Like, just put this book down. Listen, I'll tell you, I'm the monster at the end. Surprise, it's me, I'm so clever. Just close the book, you don't want to know, and I don't want to tell you. I don't want you to see me wounded. I don't want you to see my deepest, darkest truth. My mother arrives a few pages later, and we angrily rehash some of our most infamous battles. Like the time I checked myself into a psych ward, and she didn't notice I was gone for several days. Like the time I finally, at the age of 19, got her arrested for assault and became homeless for a summer. Like the time she said I made her want to kill herself. It felt good to let all that fury and pain out that I hadn't really shared with a lot of people. It felt even better to draw her reactions. I could make her say everything I needed her to say, but that I don't think she ever will be able to. How she understood the consequences of her actions. How I had hurt her too, and most importantly, that she was sorry. Instead of vicious, she's vulnerable. She's scared that it will turn out to be her at the end of the book, that she's my monster, all alone. But when the reader turns the last page, it's blank. There's no monster. We were never monsters. We're just wicked, wounded women with positions of power in each other's lives. So I would like to ask you today to go home and think about your own story, the way that you tell your own story to people when they ask you where you're from and what's happened to you. See if you can play with the details, with the exact wording, because I know that I tell my own story the same way every time. Just try to change the mood, the tone. Just play with the facts a little. You can even make stuff up. It's really fun to make stuff up about your own life. Because I did this, because I took my own story and I made some stuff up with it, I was able to kind of find a closure and a forgiveness with my mom that I don't think we'll be able to have in real life. But now I speak to her several times a year on holidays, and her phone calls are civil. They're even pleasant. I find it a lot easier to be patient with her and to tell her, you're really getting close to one of my buttons here. Please don't push it. It's just easier to have a little grace. Our reality is shaped by the stories we tell each other, but we inhabit the stories that we tell ourselves. We can trap ourselves in what has happened. We can stay angry and bitter at what was done to us. We can create a monster at the end of the book, and in our bitterness, we can become somebody else's monster. Or we can weave the past into the shape of forgiveness. Don't define us. We can rewrite old wounds. We can write our own story. Thank you.
Please rise in body or in spirit and join in singing our closing hymn, number 208, Every Time I Feel the Spirit, hymn number 208.
Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Upon the mountain, my God spoke. Out of the mount came fire and smoke. All around me looked so shy. Asked my God if all was mine. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. The river Jordan runs right cold, chills the body, not the soul. Ain't but one train on this track, runs to heaven and right back. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Tell me one last thing, said Harry. Is this real, or has it been happening in my head this whole time? Of course it is happening inside your head, Harry, said Dumbledore. But why on earth should that mean that it's not real? This service is over. Let our service with each other continue renewed.